He sat on the palace floor, robe soaked, mouth bleeding, biting into his own crown. The King of France was chewing gold. Courtiers watched in silence. No one moved. No one dared. Charles VI, once adored, now growled at mirrors and whispered to walls. He thought the crown was alive. He said it had to be destroyed from within. This was not a myth. This was not madness whispered in corners. This was the ruler of a kingdom, unraveling in front of his court. He believed he was made of glass. And this was just the beginning. The horror had only started. He was born into everything. Silk sheets, marble halls, gold cradles, servants waiting at every corner. Before he could walk, he had a crown waiting for him. Charles Valois, heir to the throne of France, son of King Charles V, the Wise, a boy born into glory, surrounded by power, raised with the weight of a nation already pressing on his small shoulders. He was not meant to rule in chaos. He was meant to be France's salvation. The court called him the hope of the kingdom. He was tall, handsome, quiet, and graceful. As a child, he watched more than he spoke. Everyone thought it meant he was thoughtful, mature, measured. They were wrong. Behind the stillness, there was something else. Servants whispered that the boy sometimes stared at walls for hours, that he forgot names he had known for years, that he would freeze during meals, fork in hand, eyes wide, as if something no one else could see was standing beside him. But he was royal, and royalty did not break. At 12, he was married off to Isabeau of Bavaria, a match for strategy, not love. At 19, he was crowned king. France was already sick. The 100 Years' War drained the treasury. The nobles fought each other more than they fought the English. The peasants starved. Now the boy was king. He was supposed to bring order, strength, peace. Instead, he brought silence. He sat in councils and said nothing. He listened to debates and walked out. He signed documents, then forgot he had ever seen them. He ordered troops to march, then canceled the campaign the same night. He demanded taxes, then waived them days later. The court blamed nerves. They blamed youth. Some blamed sorcery. But it was none of those things. The cracks had already started. One night, a servant found him pacing in his chamber, naked, mumbling to himself. His fingers were bleeding. He had clawed at the stone wall for hours. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. No one spoke of it again. But behind the curtains, in whispers between guards and midwives, one truth began to take shape. The King of France was not well, and his mind was beginning to turn against him. The golden heir was slipping, and no one could stop what was coming. Not prayer, not politics, not power. The crown was still on his head, but it was starting to rot from the inside. Before we move on, we want to thank you for listening. We really like making these videos and would highly appreciate it if you subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Let's move on. He was only 19 when they placed the crown on his head. The bells rang across Paris, while crowds filled the streets. Flowers rained from balconies. France had a king again, a young one, a strong one, or so they believed. Inside the cathedral, Charles knelt before the altar. His robe shimmered with gold. His hands trembled. No one noticed. They saw only the crown as it touched his head. He stood, smiled, and gave his oath, but his eyes were distant, as if he was already somewhere else. The war with England had torn France apart. His father, Charles the Wise, had ruled with control and strategy, but now the throne belonged to his son. A boy with no fire in his voice, no weight in his words. At court, the nobles tested him. They argued louder, demanded more. They knew he was unsure. They saw it in the way he hesitated, the way he looked to others before speaking. Still, he tried. He held councils. He led hunts. He walked through the streets to greet his people. On good days, he was calm and thoughtful. He handed out coins. He blessed children. He quoted scripture. On bad days, he disappeared for hours. He locked himself in his chamber and refused to speak. He stared at the fire until it burned low. Servants said he would whisper to the flames. They said he asked them questions. They said he waited for answers. The queen grew restless. His brothers grew bolder. The dukes started drawing lines in the shadows. Everyone wanted control. Everyone saw the gaps. But Charles did not see them. He was too busy holding on to his mind. One moment, he was sharp. The next, he forgot what day it was. He greeted old friends as strangers. He asked why his brother Louis looked so old, not realizing 10 years had passed. The pressure grew. The court demanded decisions. The war needed a king. Charles sat in silence. He walked through gardens with his shoes off. He picked at the skin on his arms. He laughed when nothing was said. But he kept showing up. He kept wearing the crown, even when it weighed like iron. France did not yet know the truth, that their king was breaking apart, not from wounds, not from enemies, but from something inside, and soon it would explode in the most violent way possible. It happened in the middle of summer. The sun was high. The roads were dry. The king was traveling south with his guard, his advisors, and his friend, Olivier de Clisson. They were riding through a forest near Le Mans. The trees arched over the path, casting long shadows. The horses moved slowly. The king rode at the front, quiet as always. Then a man stepped from the trees. No one saw where he came from. He wore no shoes. His clothes were torn. The guards grabbed him immediately. Charles stared. His face went pale. They dragged the man away. The king kept riding, but something had changed. His eyes twitched. His lips moved, but no words came. The forest grew darker as they rode. Then came the sound. Clang. A soldier's spear hit another's armor by accident. It was small, barely more than a knock, but it was enough. The king screamed. He drew his sword and turned on his men. He slashed the closest knight across the neck. The man fell from his horse, choking on blood. Another guard tried to stop him. Charles stabbed him through the chest. He was no longer a king. He was an animal, foaming at the mouth, swinging wildly, his eyes wide with terror. He shouted that demons were chasing him, that his men had turned into monsters, that the forest was alive and trying to eat him. It took 5 men to bring him down. When they pinned him, he wept. Then he laughed. Then he stopped moving completely. They carried him back to the castle like a corpse. His eyes stayed open the whole way. He did not speak for 2 days. When he finally woke, he had no memory of the forest, no memory of the blood. He asked if the hunt had gone well. The court was stunned. No one dared answer. Behind closed doors, his advisors began to panic. They said it was exhaustion, a fever, sorcery. Some blamed the man in the forest. Some blamed the queen. But deep down, they knew. This was not an illness that would pass. Something had snapped inside the king, and it was only going to get worse. The king began to believe he was made of glass, not a metaphor, not madness whispered behind closed doors. Charles told his doctors. He told his servants. He told his queen. His bones, he said, were hollow, fragile, clear as ice. If anyone touched him too hard, he would shatter. He begged his tailors to sew iron rods into his clothes to hold him together. He refused to let anyone near him unless they walked softly and spoke in low tones. Even the queen had to be careful. She once leaned too close during a meal, and he screamed until guards rushed in. Charles stopped sitting on thrones. He only sat on cushions. He stopped walking on stone. He demanded thick rugs, and still he believed the cracks were forming. He pressed his hands to his chest and claimed he could feel it splintering. The doctors could not help him. They applied leeches, burned herbs, prayed. Nothing changed. Then came the heat. He started claiming that his blood was boiling. He said his skin was cooking from the inside. He locked himself in his room with wet towels and buckets of cold water. He stood naked in front of windows, arms spread, begging the wind to cool him down. At night, he refused blankets. During winter, He slept on cold stone. His servants wept in secret. The man they once called their son now crawled across the floor, searching for cracks in his own body. The nobles avoided him. The queen stopped visiting his room. Some believed he was cursed. Others feared the devil lived inside him. But the king was not evil. He was terrified. He believed his own body had turned against him. He believed a touch could destroy him. And as that fear grew, so did the silence around him. Meetings were cancelled. Plans delayed. France was a ship without a rudder. The real ruler now was fear. And fear ruled from a room where a man whispered to his bones, waiting for them to break. He forgot his name, not just once. He would rise from bed and ask the nearest servant who he was. His voice was calm, almost polite, as if he were inquiring about the weather. They told him, again and again, "You are Charles, King of France." Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he cried. Other times, he did not believe them. He asked for his father, long dead. He asked for his brother, killed years earlier. He demanded that his coronation be prepared, though he had been crowned for over a decade. The queen stood at his side. He stared at her with blank eyes. He asked, "Why is this woman in my chambers?" Isabeau tried to explain. She showed him their children. He asked whose they were. He studied their faces like strangers in a crowd. On some days, he thought he was still a child. He ordered lessons in Latin and arithmetic. On others, he believed he was a monk and demanded silence, prayer, and fasting. Nothing lasted. Memory slipped through him like water through fingers. He would ask the same question 3 times in 1 hour. He forgot his orders. He forgot his meals. But worst of all, he forgot his rage. That meant those who wronged him no longer feared punishment. They could whisper, plot, steal, and lie. He would forget by morning. His court changed. Loyal men left. Opportunists filled the vacuum. The king's chamber turned into a game board. Everyone wanted control. The Duke of Burgundy, the Queen, his uncles. Power shifted in and out of reach like a pendulum, and in the middle of it all sat Charles, smiling at strangers, speaking to ghosts, calling for people who had been dead for years. France no longer had a ruler. It had a body, a fragile, confused body sitting on a throne that no longer recognized him. A kingdom's memory could stretch for centuries, but its king could not remember a single day. They called it a celebration, a winter feast held deep in the royal palace. Music, firelight, dancers, meat and wine overflowing. The walls echoed with laughter. The scent of roasted lamb and melted wax drifted through the halls. Charles wanted joy. That is what he told them. Joy would heal him. Joy would make the shadows go away. So they gave him joy, or something that looked like it. The king ordered a masquerade, a grand performance of beasts and wild men. He wanted his nobles to dress as forest demons, furred costumes, dripping with resin, wooden horns, paint that covered the eyes. Charles dressed himself as well. His mask was covered in feathers. His costume was soaked in pitch and thread. His men joined him, all dressed in the same way. They danced through the banquet hall. They screamed like animals. The nobles clapped and laughed. Some recoiled. Others pretended to enjoy it. Then someone brought a torch too close. The flame kissed the edge of one costume. In seconds, it became fire. Then the fire leapt to the others. The pitch caught fast. The heat roared. They didn't scream like men. They screamed like dying things. One man's skin melted from his jaw. Another's eyes boiled in his skull. They ran, but the fire ran faster. Guests overturned at tables. Wine spilled, but it was not enough. The hall turned into a nightmare of flame and blood. One man survived by diving into a barrel of water. The rest burned on the marble floor, thrashing. Charles survived, but not because of luck. One quick-thinking lady threw a heavy skirt over him, smothered the flames, pulled him from the madness. He stood in the ashes, silent, his mask still half burned, his hands blistered, his eyes blank. He did not cry. He did not speak. He just watched the bodies burn. After that night, joy was no longer allowed. Feasts were smaller, music quiet. No masks, no torches. The king's mind sank deeper. He never spoke of the fire again, but he never removed the blackened feathers from his chamber either. They hung from a hook near his bed, as if he needed to remember what Joy had done, as if part of him still believed he had danced with demons. He stopped wearing it. At first, they thought it was a gesture of humility, a symbol of piety. Then they realized he was afraid of it. He said the crown was alive, that it whispered at night, that it had grown teeth. Charles demanded it be locked away. He ordered the royal goldsmith to melt it down. The crown was not a symbol of power anymore. It was a threat. Then, one night, he asked to see it again. The chamber was cleared. Just the king and the crown. No one knows what happened for the first hour. Then a servant heard a sound. A scraping, a soft clang of metal on stone. He opened the door and found the king crouched on the floor, holding the crown in his hands. His mouth was bloody, his lips torn. Bits of gold were scattered near his knees. He had been chewing the rim. A tooth had broken. Blood dripped from his chin. He looked up and smiled. "It's inside now," he said. "It cannot speak anymore." Guards rushed in. The crown was taken away. The king was bathed. His mouth was treated with oils and cloth. But no one could wash away what they had seen. After that night, he refused to wear any symbol of rule. No rings, no scepter, no royal cloak. He believed all of them were poisoned with voices. He said the crown had told him secrets, that it had confessed its sins, that it begged to be destroyed. And when no one else would listen, he did what he thought was right. He silenced it. One bite at a time. The queen was horrified. The court was speechless, but no one challenged him. Because what do you say to a king who eats his own crown? What do you do with a ruler who believes gold has a voice, and that only blood can quiet it? They cleaned the chamber. They replaced the rug. But the stain remained. Not on the floor. In the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. The day the King of France chose to consume his power rather than wear it. And the day the crown itself seemed to scream. He still breathed. He still walked the halls. But Charles was no longer king in anything but name. The throne remained beneath him, but the hands that moved France were no longer his. They belonged to others. First to his uncles, then to his brother, the Duke of Orleans, then to the Queen, Isabeau. Each played their part. Each tugged at the strings. The mad king was their puppet. They would place papers before him. He would stare, unblinking. Sometimes he signed them. Sometimes he signed his own name over and over again, as if trying to remember it. He sat through councils and spoke to no one. When asked for opinions, he smiled at the window or whispered to a chair. Once, he passed a law he had already abolished the year before. Another time, he sent troops into a region he thought was under enemy control. It was not. It was part of his own kingdom. The people began to notice. They whispered that their king had become a shell, a walking corpse wrapped in velvet, and the ones behind him fought for his shadow. The Duke of Burgundy accused the Queen of scheming. The Queen blamed the king's brother. Alliances broke and shifted. Armies were raised not against England, but against each other. France bled from within. And through it all, Charles drifted. Some days he smiled and told stories to servants he believed were nobles from centuries past. Other days, he refused to speak, curled into a corner, clutching a cloth doll he believed was his infant daughter. He wore no crown. He gave no speeches. He did not attend his own court. They paraded him through the streets when they needed him seen. They hid him in silence when he became too unpredictable. To the people, he was a rumor. To the court, he was a problem. To the kingdom, he was a void. A throne cannot rule itself, and a man who cannot remember his own name cannot rule a kingdom. France was falling apart, and at its center sat a man with no voice, no memory, and no control, but still wearing the title of king. They stopped calling it madness, at least not out loud. Inside the palace, the royal family spoke in careful tones. They said he was unwell. They said he needed rest. They said the king had moments of confusion. Moments. But those moments stretched into weeks, then years. Behind locked doors, the truth was harder to ignore. Charles no longer recognized his wife. He often mistook her for a servant or a spy. When she came close, he backed away. Sometimes he shouted at her. Other times, he clung to her dress and begged her to protect him from invisible creatures. She learned to keep her distance. The children were told to stay quiet around their father. Never touch him. Never speak unless spoken to. One of his sons once tried to hug him. Charles screamed so loudly that servants thought he was being attacked. He struck the boy and ran to his chamber, sobbing that his glass bones had been shattered. After that, the children stayed away. The queen had her own chambers. The king's siblings managed the court in his absence. He was alive, but he was already gone. His family became actors, pretending that things were normal. They smiled at feasts. They made speeches in his name. They signed laws in his honor. But when night came, they locked his door and prayed he would not hurt himself before morning. Guards were placed outside his room, not to protect him from enemies, but to protect others from him. Sometimes he screamed for hours. Sometimes he laughed when nothing was funny. Sometimes he stood still for so long they thought he had died. When physicians came, he either ignored them or accused them of trying to poison him. No one dared contradict him, not anymore. They tried to hide the worst of it from the public, but rumors always slipped through. People in the streets whispered about a king who feared his own reflection, a king who barked like a dog, a king who slept with stones under his bed to keep his soul from floating away. The royal family kept the crown polished. They kept the portraits clean. They kept the illusion alive, but in truth, they were terrified, not of losing power, of what the king might become next, and how much longer they could keep pretending he was still one of them. It did not stay inside the palace. The king's madness seeped into every corner of France. When the crown falters, the nation stumbles. When the king loses his mind, the kingdom begins to rot, and rot it did. The nobles, once restrained by a central voice, now fought openly. Power was no longer granted. It was taken. Dukes raised their own armies. Regions stopped paying taxes. Whole cities turned to local warlords for protection. The queen and royal uncles claimed authority, but their alliances shifted like sand. There was no trust. There was only fear. Fear that the king would wake one day and declare war on his own people. Fear that he would not wake at all. And worse, fear that someone else would take the crown while he still breathed. The court split. Factions formed. Civil war hovered just beyond the gates. In taverns and churches, people spoke the name Charles, with pity or contempt. The once proud name had become a warning. Merchants wrote it into contracts. Payment will be made unless the king goes mad again. Soldiers used it as a curse. May your sword break like Charles's mind. Peasants told stories of a ruler who had been cursed by a witch. Some believed his crown had been forged in hell. Others said he was a punishment for France's sins. The madness spread not just through rumor, but through culture. Plays were written mocking the court. Paintings showed a broken crown, dripping with blood. And yet, he still lived. He still walked the halls, still signed his name, still believed he was made of glass, still talked to the moon, still stared at walls, whispering to his long-dead ancestors. The country fractured. Foreign enemies noticed. England circled like a vulture. France was ripe for the taking. And inside its golden palace, the king babbled into a basin of water, searching for a voice that had long vanished. His sickness was no longer his alone. It had become France's. A crown can crack, But when it shatters, it cuts everyone who holds it. And now, there was blood on every hand. The kingdom crumbled quietly at first. Then it tore itself apart. With the king lost inside his own mind, France became a battlefield of ambition. No one ruled. Everyone pulled. The queen formed her own council. The Duke of Orléans, the king's brother, claimed he alone spoke with Charles in his rare lucid moments. The Duke of Burgundy called them liars and seized control of the north. Each claimed to act in the king's name. Each used his madness as a weapon. While they fought for power, the people paid the price. Cities were looted. Churches were burned. Villages were torn apart by roaming soldiers who swore allegiance to whatever banner paid them that week. Taxes were collected twice. Food was taken by force. Justice became a matter of whose army stood closer. The streets of Paris filled with bodies. Some from war, some from hunger, some simply from fear. The 100 Years' War, already raging with England, grew even more brutal. The English saw what was happening. They watched France devour itself. And then they moved. They took lands that should have been defended. They claimed cities that once flew the French flag. At the Battle of Agincourt, thousands of French knights were slaughtered in mud and rain. The king did not send reinforcements. He did not speak of the defeat. He may not have even known it had happened. He was inside the palace, feeding birds that were not there, whispering to his dead father, walking barefoot across stone, convinced he would hear it crack before his bones did. While France burned, her king watered invisible gardens. His son, the Dauphin, tried to rally troops. But he was a boy, a shadow of a father who no longer saw him. The nobles no longer listened. They listened only to their own greed. The crown had lost its voice, and so the kingdom lost its spine. Foreign diplomats referred to France as a corpse, still twitching. Poets called it a bride, whose groom had gone mad on the wedding night. The church offered prayers, but even they began to prepare for collapse. And still, Charles wandered. He bathed when he remembered what water was. He ate only when his servants fed him by hand. He screamed at invisible men. He cursed furniture. He praised the sun, then begged it not to blind him. He no longer read, no longer ruled, no longer understood what the word king even meant. He was a man unmade, and France followed him into the dark. He died as he had lived for most of his reign, quiet, confused, and alone. There was no dramatic collapse, no final outburst, no whispered last words that would echo through time. King Charles VI of France simply stopped speaking. The madness that had tormented him for decades no longer needed to scream. It had done its job. It had hollowed him out from the inside until there was nothing left to claim. He spent his final days in a single room of the Hotel Saint-Paul in Paris. The chamber, once built to reflect royal glory, had become a tomb without walls. The windows were kept shuttered. The curtains were always drawn. Candles flickered even during daylight, but he never seemed to notice whether it was morning or night. Servants tiptoed around him. The queen rarely visited. His children came only when summoned, which was almost never. Charles sat in silence, day after day, with a wool blanket draped over his knees and a single object in his hands, a carved wooden toy from his childhood, worn smooth by years of restless fingers. Sometimes he stared at it for hours. Sometimes he held it close to his ear, listening. He believed it spoke to him. His skin had grown thin and papery. His once bright hair had turned to ash. The man who once claimed to be made of glass now looked like something already shattered. When the end came, there was no resistance. He lay down, closed his eyes, and vanished into the silence he had lived in for so long. It was October 21st, 1422. He had ruled for 42 years, but of those 42, the court agreed that only the first 5 had belonged to the man. The rest had belonged to the madness. They did not ring church bells. They did not declare a week of mourning. France was already mourning itself. The English controlled half the kingdom. The civil war between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians still burned. The queen had made deals with the enemy to secure her power. There was no time to grieve. The king was dead, but the chaos he left behind was very much alive. They buried him in the royal necropolis at Saint-Denis. No grand procession, no parade of loyal nobles, just a cold box lowered into the earth. And with it, they buried a legacy of fear, fire, and silence. He had been born to rule a kingdom, but in the end, he became a legend of madness, a caution, not a crown, and France would never be the same. If you came this far, make sure to click the next video that's on the screen right now. Subscribe to stay engaged for more content.